Hello and welcome to the Nittany Dispatch. I am John Sauber, Penn State football beat writer at the Center Daily Times, joined as always by Audrey Snyder of The Athletic. Audrey, it was a kind of long day, but we've made it through it, and so has Penn
Long,
State.
dreary day.
Oh, dreary doesn't do it justice.
Penn State gets the win, 63-0 against UMass. John, it was as lopsided, as ugly as we expected for the Minutemen. But yeah, this weather, man. I woke up recording this Saturday night. I woke up Saturday morning, and it did one of those where I looked at my phone and I was like, "Oh my gosh, it must be late. Like it's not even light out." Yeah, it was like 7 o'clock. It looked like nighttime all day. Shout out to the fans before we dive into this who
Yeah,
sat through this. Um, Beaver Stadium was, it was splotchy, but wisely, students were sitting under the overhangs. The attendance, which again, it always goes by tickets sold, not butts and seats. It was 105,533, but so many people sat through this game, and it just really wasn't much of a game. I'm impressed. By the end of the game, you're like, why are you guys still here? Like, what is wrong with you? But
and
people were having a good time.
there were not many people there by the end. Before we get too far into this, though, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. If you are watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button there. Leave reviews on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating on there if you will. Always helps the show out. But no, this was. I remember looking down in the stands, and I think it was in the late in the third quarter, early in the fourth quarter, and I turned to Bob Flounders at Penn Live and I said, "How many people do you think are here? Like 10,000 at this point?" Because it really was like, I mean, the game was over at halftime as we had
Yeah.
predicted, but like it was, and it was really rainy at that point too. It was late and it was cold. I went down on the field
Yeah.
at the end of the game. Some of the more veteran reporters stayed under the tunnel and dry. I
It was
am not
me.
one to do that. Yes.
I went out
I,
to the field, had my
yes.
raincoat on, did an about face, and I was like, I'm out of here. I'll be in the tunnel.
Yeah, I had the old Rose Bowl game rain pullover on, so I stayed kind of dry, which was very nice. That was
A
very
place where it
effective.
also rained all week in sunny
Yes,
Southern California. Yeah.
which is incredible. I've been to, I don't know if I've told you this, I've been to Southern California, I think 5 or 6 times, and it's rained all but one time that I've gone. I went to San Diego twice, and it rained both times. A couple friends who lived there said it never rains there, and both times I went, it rained, which
So
is, I
maybe it's
think,
you.
yeah,
You're
it's
the
kind of
problem.
on me at that point. Yeah. But no, I think like this was a credit to the fans for staying it however long you did, because I don't think many people really wanted to be there. But this was a blowout win. And honestly, like it's dominating as a win as you'd want if you're a Penn State fan leading into the Ohio State game.
John, the thing that impressed me, because again, I'm looking at the box score in front of me here. It was 28-0 at the half, but it might felt like it was like 42-0 because UMass just couldn't do anything. Penn State's defense, again, which I feel like we say this every week, dominant, just absolutely teeing off on UMass. Penn State had 6 sacks in the first half, finished with 7 sacks, but it was just one of those games where, like, right away from the first series, we expected it would be a mismatch in the trenches, and it was so apparent. I mean, it was right away. I'm like, oh, these defensive ends, to the point where I'm like, they actually might like really, really hurt someone pretty badly, because
No,
it was concerning.
that was something we were talking about, myself, Bob, another friend of the podcast, Johnny McGonigal, Penn Live. Like we kept saying, like at some point, like Penn State kind of needed to take their starters out for the safety of everyone involved, because like Tyson Pumachan was, and credit to him for hanging in there and trying to deliver throws, but they teed off on him. Like they
Yeah.
just kept getting after him, kept hitting him. Even Dennis Sutton got called for roughing the passer on one that I thought was a pretty blatant roughing the passer. Like the ball was
Yeah.
out for a second or two, and then he threw a shoulder into Pumachan's back. But like this was an utter domination by the defense from the start. This is one of the best defenses in the country. I don't know how much more you can even say about them on that side of the ball, right? But I think
I'll
the
say a
the
little bit more, John.
all right,
I will add a
let's
little more.
hit us with all the fun stats from this game, because there is some other interesting stuff I think that we should talk about here.
Well, UMass finished up with 109 yards of total offense. 109. At the half, it was something like they had 26 yards, I believe, if I'm recalling correctly. They ran 62 plays, which
I
um
don't know how that
I don't
happened. I said
literally I
it's
remember
crazy.
none of them. Like they
Yeah.
ran 62 plays and nothing like notable happened. Average gain per play 1.8 yards. Gosh, I mean, this was just one of those games where you're looking at it and you're like, all right, at some point, how much, and Penn State rotated a lot. I mean, I'm
Yes.
looking at the participation report right now, and I'll get snap counts later on tonight and sift through that. And it's going to be a lot, but a ton of freshmen played. Again, this is about building depth. This is about looking toward the future. Um, but when you look at this Penn State defense, to me, the crazy thing is, like, you look at 7 sacks, but they're coming from multiple guys. Cam Miller, I thought, had a great game tonight. 2 sacks, which
Outside of getting hit with that punt.
yes, like 2
Was it?
sacks, I would
Yeah, it
not
was
have
Cam
I
Miller.
think it was him. I think it was him.
Yeah.
I would not have projected Cam Miller to have 2 sacks tonight, like, just one of those kinda mystifying numbers. But I thought that it was a big step for him because he's gonna be a big part here when we kinda start looking down the road because so much of this year is about the talent they have at corner with Kalen King and Johnny Dixon. But yeah, long term, he's going to be a big part of what they do there in the future. So I thought it was really a positive for him. Gosh, I'm looking at the numbers right now. Disa Isaac, 2.5 sacks. He was a monster. Like
Early
he
on
was
too,
really
like
good. Yeah.
watching him get off the edge. I remember there were a
Mhm.
couple times where I like said in the press box, like again, out of fear for Pumachan, like you would see Adisa beat his guy, and I would just go, "Oh no!" Like you could see the hit coming before Pumachan did, before anyone on UMass
Well,
could do anything about it, and
the
he
sack
drilled him a couple times.
The hit, Adisa Isaac and then Dennis Sutton, when they combined for that
Yeah,
sack, man, that pocket just collapsed, and
never
that
had a
to
chance.
me, yeah, early on was like, okay, that's a tone setter. That's how this is gonna be. Um, but the fact that even as Penn State rotated through there, UMass still could not get anything going, which again is a credit to the depth on this defense. The fact that they preserved the shutout. I mean, they kept their foot on the gas, and I think that's you mentioned John in the intro, this is how you want to kind of springboard into Ohio State. Like, if you're a Penn State fan, you do not have much to complain about after today, right? Like, I'll nitpick
I
a
can
little
find
bit
some
here because
things.
that's, yeah, I was going to say, there's one thing in particular that I think we can nitpick. Um, but go ahead, John. What hairs would you like to split today?
I still think this passing game isn't. I
Mhm.
can't even. It's tough because like you want to come into this and be able to identify specific things. The passing game still feels just kind of offbeat, I guess I would call it. And I think it's kind of everyone outside of the guys we always talk about, right? Keandre Lambert Smith, Tre Wallace. Tre Wallace, by the way, I thought was really, really good in his first game back. I know he fumbled,
Um,
but I thought he
I
was like getting open consistently.
Yes,
Didn't
he
always get
looked
found,
the
but yeah,
21-yard reception, the catch and run, to me, it looked like he was a kinda next level player, the way he
yeah.
separated there and broke off. The point the thing that struck me, yeah, comes out with the fumble right away. Then they did take the deep shot to him, right?
Yes.
Remember they took the deep shot to him down the sideline, but
I
they didn't connect on that. I haven't seen a replay of it yet.
I have not either.
It looked like it went off his hands.
So it looking based on and there's a lot to take into account given the weather
Mhm.
and situation, everything at the
Right, the weather
stadium.
was horrible, raining, yeah.
It looked like the throw wasn't bad, but it was a little off target. And leaping for that ball is much harder when the
Mhm.
grass is slick, right? Because you go up, you're probably just going to lose your footing. You know what I mean? You're probably not going to get a clean jump, and your hands are wet, your gloves are wet. Like that felt like in normal conditions, that's just a completed pass, right? But I think the weather, the circumstances, like all of it, kind of played into it there. I didn't think it was a terrible ball by Drew Allar. I don't know that you necessarily should expect Tre Wallace to come down with it in that situation. You'd like him to, but
Mhm.
I don't know if you should because it is a tough situation. And watching the replays on the big screen, it looked like he outstretched his hands and it hit off like the top half of his fingertips. So it's like, okay, it's tough to say he has to come down with that ball. It is
Yeah,
something that I'm really
so
interested in
would have
on
been
the
a tough
rewatch.
catch. Yeah,
Yes,
definitely, like, would have been a tough catch.
in
Wallace
clean
was
conditions, you'd expect him to make it.
but yeah, I mean, and this was I mean, there were points of this game where it was an absolute downpour.
As we
Wallace
found out
ended
when we
up
went on the field afterward.
That's why some of us stayed in the tunnel. Wallace
That's true.
ended up with 3 receptions, for 44 yards. The long was 22, or I'm sorry, 22 yak yards. The long was 21. So I was right.
Mhm.
I'm not making things up. Targeted 4 times. Keandre Lambert Smith, again, the clear number 1 receiver, targeted 9 times, finished with 6 catches for 30 yards. This was also a big day for the tight ends. We saw Theo Johnson get in the end zone not once but twice. So that was big. Tyler Warren had 1 touchdown and should have been 2. I'm thinking about
Yes.
because it was the same area on the field, a little bit lower than the Wallace play. Um,
Yes.
Wide
That
open,
ball
nobody in front of him.
that one,
Clanks
like, hit
off
him
his
in the
hands.
hands. Yeah,
Yeah.
didn't that wasn't, like, hit him in the fingertips. That
Mhm.
looked like it hit him in the hands. Yeah, should have come down with that. It is tough, you're going through all the tight ends. Those guys were so wide open that it's almost tough to gauge, like, okay, how much of this
Yeah.
is just UMass is the worst defense in college football right now,
Mhm.
right? Like, are those guys they're not getting that separation usually because they're really great athletes for their position, but like they're not receivers, they're not going to create as much separation as Lambert Smith and Tre Wallace do. So you have to wonder, like, okay, is this replicable against Ohio State, or is this more of a they need tight window throws like the one I think it was on the first drive of the game where Drew Allar hit Tyler Warren coming across the middle on a
Yes.
third down,
Mhm.
and it was like a sliding grab, and that was like a perfect tight window throw. You trust the big, physical, strong tight end to bring the ball in, to have strong hands, to go down and get it. And I thought that was like a good example of this is the kind of throw that you need Penn State to make against Ohio State, against Michigan, and he did it. Against what would be similar coverage against those teams, right? If it's in that situation, right? Because of the tight window. But I do like the tight ends, it almost feels misleading. Like the stats almost feel misleading
Yeah.
because they were so open. It was like, okay, is the defense just like, do they have no idea where they need to be right now? Is that what's happening?
Theo Johnson was asked about it after the game, and he did say, he's like, "Yeah, like, I did not expect to be that wide open, like, it was weird." And yeah, I mean, I think it's almost like, so, like, I teach as an adjunct at Penn State, and sometimes you're like, "Alright, you have to grade on a curve," right?
Right.
Because and if people don't retain the information, maybe it's on them, but if the whole class fails, then it's probably on me, and I think you have to kinda think of this game as that curve where you're like, okay, well, how much of this really applies to the bigger context of the season? How much of it is just that UMass is terrible and even you could underperform and still blow them out? And the thing that I will nitpick with the offense, because you said it just feels like the passing attack, there's some walls, and I totally agree with you. For me, it was a slow start, and that kind of feeds into
Yes.
that. Like you come out, Harrison Wallace has that fumble. The next drive, Drew Aller gets sacked on third down to end it. And you're just kind of sitting there like, man, like this is a team you should be dominating from the jump, coming off the idle week. And I don't know, maybe there's something to that, right? Like maybe that was part of it, a little bit of a idle
Little
week
weather. Ooh.
hangover. Yeah, like shitty weather, the splotchy crowd. The thing I will say, I mean, that then they put the pedal down and did not let go after
Yes.
that. Credit to Daequan Hardy. You talk about momentum swings. We will, I'm sure, get into this in a bit. A lot of Daequan Hardy talk today. I made the joke. I'll make it on here. Have yourself a day. Feel free for
Boo.
anyone to use that if you'd like
Boo.
or not.
Boo. Boo.
I'll be here
Boo.
all day and night. Um, but I mean, to me, you look at that start and you say, okay, you cannot have that next weekend in Columbus. And the whole time this game is going on, in my head, I'm saying, well, how does this, how does this translate next week? You cannot come out like that, have a
Well,
turnover, and
so
then have a sack.
here's I'll push back a little bit on
Okay.
that. I think that part of this is we talked about this a little before we started recording. I think Penn State's better than Ohio State, period. Point blank,
Mhm.
they're a better team than Ohio State. The 5.5 point spread feels like way too much.
Is
I,
that
I
what it
would,
is? I didn't look.
yeah, it started at 10.5 preseason. I think it's going to come down to like 2.5 potentially and just be like, a coin toss, but the home field advantage gives Ohio
Hmm.
State the 2.5 points. But like, I almost think they can start that way against almost any team in the country because the defense is just that good, right? Like the offense is we're not there yet. I think we'll find out a lot more next week, but this might end up just being a top 2 defense, top 3 defense in the country that kind of carries a top 20 offense, right? And that top 20 offense always starts a little slower. Because I think when we talk about like needing to start fast, I think it's because okay, you don't trust the defense to hold its own for a drive or two while the offense gets
That's
going.
true. Yeah.
And I don't think that's the case this year more than any other year. There have been really good Penn State defenses in the past where, like, no matter how good they were, Ohio State was so good that you couldn't afford to be caught, you know what I mean, slipping early on in the
Every
game.
possession. Yeah. You felt like you need to get into a shootout with
Right.
them. Yeah.
This is not that Ohio State team. Like
Yeah.
Kyle McCord is not that quarterback. We'll talk more about Ohio State next week, but this is I don't think it's necessarily imperative to get off to the good start or get some momentum early because I think they're just better, right? Like I think it's kind of going to prove to be a situation where they can afford to maybe have a lull and they'll be fine because the defense can handle it. I think people will probably be surprised when they hear my prediction next week because I
Oh
don't know.
boy, don't
Yeah,
spoil
I'm
it,
not gonna say
John.
anything. We'll tease a little bit here, but I do think there will be people will be surprised. But yeah, I think Penn State for the first time in James
Probably since
Franklin's tenure.
17, they have a really good shot to go in there and win, right?
No, but I think for the first time in his tenure, they're better. Like this, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's one thing to have a good shot to win, right?
Mhm.
Because it is like because it's two elite teams facing each other. To me, this is a
Oh, so
top five team.
you're putting wait. You're putting Penn State in the elite category,
Yes,
John. That's okay. Okay.
I think this is one of the top five teams in the country facing a top like 12 to 15 team in the country. Usually that's true,
Wait. Who's
but usually it's
defined?
flipped. Right, Penn
Who's
State, I think Penn State is the top 5 team in the country, and Ohio State's closer to 12 to 15, and usually it's the other way around, right? And that's why
Mhm.
they can't afford to do all these things, so but
I
yeah,
wanted to stop because
no,
this
yeah, it's
week
fair.
the word elite takes on a whole
Yes.
new meaning when it's Ohio State week after James Franklin's great
If
not yet elite
someone
comment. It was more than 5 years ago he
I
said that. I
know.
was
This
sitting there looking
before I
that
was
up
on the beat,
tonight. Well,
that was
I was
yeah,
an
that
ink
was
stained
my
wretch at that point, yeah, already.
that was just before I started covering, Indiana over at Rivals when I was there, Indiana men's basketball and recruiting. So that was yeah, it was that long ago.
I
But yeah,
mean,
I think, like,
it's
I'm a little scared to use the word elite this week because it's essentially it feels
mhm.
like it'll make the rest of the question vanish and, like, people fixate on that. But, yeah, I think this is flipped for the first time in his tenure.
And I think we talk about this being, or I think of this as being a complete Penn State team. And to me, like the one area that we've all been kind of extra critical of, and rightfully so, up to this point has been the special teams, right? Like we all have our thoughts on the offense, the explosive plays, all of that. But to me, it was like special teams was the one area where I'm like, this could cost them a game. Now, field goal kicking, we're still going to have to see there. I mean, did you
Right.
catch John Sanders Sahaydak did come in the fourth quarter for a couple of extra points?
Some confidence extra points, I noticed those.
Confidence
It's
booster.
me it's me it's me calling them the confidence boosters, by the way. No one at Penn State called them that, but,
Oh,
like, yeah.
I wrote that too. Yeah, I said these
Yeah,
are
it
confidence
seems pretty
boosting.
clear.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think too, like to me, I mean, this was Daequan Hardy's night. Two punt returns for a touchdown, Penn State school record. I did kind of laugh because
For a season, by the way, right? James said that in the postgame.
Mhm.
I didn't know that. I knew it
Yeah,
was for a game. I didn't know no one had ever had 2 in a season.
yeah, so no one's ever done it in the game. And I mean, I remember, gosh, it was a few years ago where I probably especially kept kind of harping on well, they haven't returned a kick for a touchdown, and the
Oh,
last
yeah, I
returned
remember
a
that.
punt for
Yeah,
a
yeah.
touchdown. Last had a 100-yard rusher, and gas was like $2 a gallon type deal. Um,
Yep.
but to
Oh,
me,
yeah,
like,
that tweet went over well. That was I'll never forget that tweet
it's a
from you.
great tweet.
Yeah.
Um, to me, like the special teams, it's trending in the right direction. And the interesting thing tonight was, it's like, okay, well, Daequan Hardy and James Franklin even said it afterward. He said tonight Hardy looked special, and James has been really complimentary of Caden Saunders. The fact that he has been mostly shorthanded back there. Saunders did have I believe, it was 37-yard return
Yep.
tonight, but why hasn't Daequan Hardy been your guy all along? Now, granted, remember he wasn't unavailable for undisclosed reasons early in the year. James Franklin said this was a camp competition. They are looking for more explosive plays in all three phases, right? James Franklin mentioned that Saturday night. Hardy gave that to him. So, John, who's your punt returner next week in Columbus?
Well, I don't know if you saw this, but, shout
Uh
out
oh.
to coworker of mine, Josh Moyer, formerly of the Penn State beat, who, made note of this. This was on the BTN broadcast after the
Okay.
game. James said, "Obviously, he's earned himself a job today," about Daquan Hardy. So I think we have our answer there, right? Like, I think this kind of has to be Hardy's job. And I don't even think it's a criticism of Caden Saunders, who has done a really good job back there. He
No,
muffed one punt. He muffed one punt,
yeah.
which I don't even know if it's his fault because it was the weekend after, like the week before, everyone was talking about how he had yet to muff a punt. So it was the worst
James
jinx on the
Franklin jinxed
planet.
him. He totally
Yeah,
jinxed
it
him. Yeah.
was. Yeah,
It's,
but
yeah.
like, no, I think like how can you not? He just returned 2 punts for a touchdown in one game, and the first punt return, I think I might have just said, "Oh no," when he like got the first two UMass defenders because he shook them out of their shoes. They never had a chance, and he just followed his blocking the rest of the way. And you could tell on both that he was going to break it because again, we talk about like trying to put it through the prism of they're playing UMass. they're just way more athletic than most of these
Mhm.
dudes on UMass. Like, it's an unfair advantage.
Well,
Well, not
and
I mean,
maybe
it's an earned advantage, but, like,
don't punt it to him the way
yeah,
they did too. Like the second one, I was like, "What
I'm
are
kind
you
of alright with
doing?"
it. They're
Yeah,
they're they're there to entertain everybody at that point.
I
They're
was
just trying to add
entertained.
to the spectacle.
And I'm sitting there, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, like, what are you doing?" And to me, like, again, you look at this and you say, "Well, this is a big play. It's a momentum shifting play." The fact that Penn State's first points of the game came on a punt return for a touchdown. Again, that was not on my bingo card today either. But I think when you look at it, you say, and James Franklin said this, he's like, "We've got two guys that we feel good in that phase." And I kid you not, John, when we talked with Stacy Collins during the Idle Week on Zoom, it was on the tip of my tongue. I wanted to ask him, will you give Daequan Hardy a shot as a punt returner? Because we had heard about it in the spring, and I
Yep.
believe he did it last year when
I don't
Parker
think he's
Washington
ever
got hurt, maybe?
I don't think he's
Or he
ever
did it in
returned a punt before
practice.
this game. I think he's done it in practice because I
Because
believe that punt return for a touchdown was also his first career punt return.
okay, so you might be, but I remember like he was always in the mix. I've seen him do it at practice
Well, and
before.
he's talked about in the past, like, no, I'm good with the ball in my hands, right? Like, he's talked about wanting to do it. And we
Yeah.
saw, if you remember, in the open practice this summer, near the end of
Mhm.
fall
Where it
practice,
also was a
uh,
downpour.
yeah, and they did the Lions Den drill, where guys are essentially off the
Mhm.
line, like running at an angle toward each other, and he was one of the guys who had the ball in his hands in this situation, and I
That's
can't
right.
remember how those reps went because there were like 60 of them. I just remember the Keandre Lambert
Aaron
Smith
Lambert
and KJ
Smith.
Winston ones. Yeah, those were a lot of
Yeah.
fun. But yeah, no, like Hardy is clearly a threat with the ball in his hands, and someone that the more you get him touches, the better, right? And if that's the punt return game, like, I don't know, I wouldn't hate it if they gave him like an offensive play or two. Like, it can't hurt, right? Like, if he's that good with the ball in his
Wrinkle
hands and you need to
alert.
scheme something up, yeah, like
Wrinkle alert. Here we
it's
come.
it's
Flashing
the kind of
lights.
thing. It's the kind of thing
Mhm.
I think you should consider. Not for Ohio State, honestly, for Michigan, because Michigan, because they're better defensively and they're more of a threat, I think, than Ohio State is.
I think when you look at this, and I agree with you. I think Michigan, and as we've seen the matchups here too, like Michigan is a tougher challenge for Penn State than Ohio State, right? Like you talk about things that sometimes defy logic. I think about the 2014 game. Penn State takes Ohio State to double overtime in a game that Penn State had no business being in, coming off of sanctions.
My
Um,
sophomore year of college, for what it's worth, just to make you feel a little older.
Yikes.
Yeah.
But to me, it's like you just match up better against some teams, right? Like
Yeah.
it just doesn't explain it sometimes.
They could
But
out
that's what they've
athlete
done.
Michigan. They
Mhm.
couldn't out athlete Ohio State because like Ohio State was like top of the line athletically, right? I think
Oh
that was
yeah,
a lot
yeah,
of
yeah,
it for
yeah.
those years.
No, for sure. And I think Penn State again, because this is a year-round race, right? It's a race with NIL. It's a race with facilities. It's certainly a race in recruiting. And this week, it's going to be a race with the on-field product. And have you caught up, especially 5 years after you said, we're great, not yet elite. But I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, John, because we're going to be talking to Ohio State all week. We'll have our
That's right.
preview episode up early in the week. Bill Landis will be joining us. Good friend, does a hell of a job covering Ohio State.
Good Phillies fan.
Well, we're not talking about that. Bill was my Lady Lions beat partner back in the day at the Collegian. Really, really great guy. But we'll bring you guys that conversation next week. But to me, like tonight, Penn State kept their foot on the gas, and from a health perspective, I think they're in a pretty good place, right? Because you got Harrison Wallace back.
Yep.
Seems like he came out of the game
He
okay.
looks he looks totally like
He
he
looks
looks like
good.
there's no sign of injury or anything like that.
Yeah, and now JB Nelson, this is the one that I won't say I'm surprised that he didn't play, right? Because last we saw him, he was on a cart at Northwestern, and James Franklin. Essentially, the deal is if it was season ending, James Franklin would say as much. He has not said as much, so it's
And
not
he's been
season
asked
ending
about him. Yeah, so he's been asked
multiple
about him and
times.
given the opportunity
Mhm.
to say that it's season ending, and he hasn't,
I
said
didn't.
it.
Did you see? I was scanning the sidelines pregame during the game for JB Nelson. I didn't even
Couldn't
see him on the sidelines. I
Yeah,
could
I
have
couldn't see him.
could have missed him, but I mean, I was
Now,
doing.
yeah, there's like those binoculars and I have a
Mhm.
love-hate relationship, but I was scanning the sideline and like did not see him when I was looking for him.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, Venga Wane got the start at left guard, which expected. I mean, that was kind of what we saw
He
against Northwestern.
He got
Okay.
beat on that sack by Allar, or that's
That
where
third
Allar
down
got
sack.
sacked. Yeah, it
Yeah,
was. It looked like
that
him.
was bad.
He missed the block, and it looked like Norzad might have missed. There might have been a miscommunication or something. But like, that was bad. But generally speaking, Ioane is like good. Like, I don't think for as good as I think JB Nelson has been,
Mhm.
they're deep enough at the offensive line spots that I don't think that it's too much of a concern if Nelson can't go, because I think they're really good along the offensive line. Isn't it kind of wild, just to
It's
take a
weird.
step back for a second, how little we've talked about the offensive line of a Penn State football team? Because even last year we were
Mhm.
discussing it because it was like, oh, this is surprising. Now they're so good, you don't even mention it. It's
That is a
wild
that
how far
yeah,
they've
that's a
come.
good point. Because man, I we've seen some really bad offensive
Yes.
lines here, and you're right. I mean, it's unusual, but it's also a hell of a credit to Phil Troutwine, the way they've recruited, the way
And
they've
Frank
developed
Leonard, I
these
think,
guys.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, Frank Leonard, who still is
Still lives
living
with
above
James.
James Franklin's garage.
Yeah.
James mentioned that this past week, and I followed it up and was like, I gotta ask there, like, what's the deal? And Frank and James drive in and out of the facility together, which seems like a really fascinating relationship that is just part of coaching, part of kind of this transient profession where Leonard's family isn't here this year, so and I guess
Yep.
they haven't been, so he's
I think he said
um
he has one kid in high school, one in college, and he didn't want to move them, which makes sense.
yeah,
That
like
happens.
makes
By the way, that happens a lot in coaching, and I think more than people realize. Just as
mhm.
an example, I remember when JD Byers, when was hired as a men's basketball assistant at Penn State, hadn't lived with his wife yet. Essentially, since they got married, because she's a volleyball coach at Virginia Tech, and he was at VCU with Mike Rhodes. So it's like they hadn't lived together essentially, and he got, right after he took the job at Penn State, he got offered a job as an assistant at Virginia Tech, and it's like, well, I could
You
finally
do?
live with my wife. So like, he took the job and left after, I think it was like 10 days or something like that. But who can blame you, right? In that scenario, it's a coaching. I think we don't talk about it enough, how like really stressful it can be on a family, and like on all of that aspect of it.
It's a crazy, like, absolutely crazy profession, and yes, these people make a lot of money.
Right,
No,
that's
their
what the
jobs are
money's
nothing
for,
like
right? Like,
ours. I mean,
yeah,
it's just so different, and I think, like, there's just you see some of those instances, right? And I think we got one of those tonight after the game where, man, the clock's ticking. We do not wanna talk about UMass. We don't wanna ask James Franklin much about UMass. We're ready to start firing the Ohio State questions.
yeah.
And he's like, "Can I just have a few hours of normalcy? Like, I just wanna go home, hang out with my wife." Like, his friend Mighty from Pittsburgh was in town. I wrote a story about James and Mighty when I was at the Post-Gazette years ago, back when Penn State did the coaches caravan. Um, I forget how I even found out about it, but, like, this is his guy from back in the day, like, his good friend, and I just
Yeah, he said he
remember
comes in for
meeting.
every game.
Yeah, he's here all the time. I met them in Pittsburgh, and James was like going around looking at, gosh, I think it was either his grandma or his aunt's house. There was some connection to Pittsburgh, but he met us there on the caravan stop, and I spent like the afternoon with Mighty. Fascinating guy. But again, James is like, I just want to hang out with my friend, with my wife, with my kids, have a few hours of normalcy, and like come Tuesday, I promise I will answer all of your Ohio State questions, but right now, like, they wanted to enjoy it. The mood in the locker room, apparently, based off of players we asked, you would not be able to tell that this was like celebrating a win against UMass. Like, they celebrated like as if this was
Yep.
any other big win. Those of us in the tunnel were able to see Penn State run off. They're doing, which I think is a really great idea this year.
The
They have
win
the win
cam.
cam.
And I
I
got a
love that.
little I got a little meta on that when I took a video of the WinCam video being taken, which is on
It's
my phone,
almost
so it has
like
not been uploaded
being in the
anywhere.
almost like being in the tunnel and the dry spot was the right place to be.
Yeah.
Um,
Listen, I made
but
my way there eventually.
we all got there eventually. But I do think like they celebrated this win hard. It
Yeah.
goes back to you and I talked about this earlier in the week, John. Like you only get so many opportunities to play this game, so many
Yep.
opportunities in Beaver Stadium. Yes, to us, it's about the news cycle doesn't stop. We're moving on to Ohio State. But for them, they wanted to enjoy this. Chop Robinson after the game, I asked him something about Ohio State. I forget exactly what it was. And he was like, I haven't even had an hour yet. And I was like, all right, man, fair. Like, that's fine.
Yeah.
But they
And
wanted
I
to enjoy it. They wanted to have fun.
yeah, and
And
that's
like
like the
they have
nature of it
every
too. I
right
think
to.
we
Yeah.
Yeah, we were going around asking whoever we could, right, about Ohio State and kind of how quickly you flip that switch was the thing that I asked a bunch of
Mhm.
guys, and like they all said essentially, tomorrow, meaning Sunday, is when they'll kind of flip the switch and be focusing on that because they should enjoy a win, right? It's a shutout. They put up 63. Yes, UMass is bad. Yes, they were outmatched, but they took care of business and played how they should have, right? If you especially the defense. So I think that's a
Don't
a
take
valid point.
status quo for granted, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right, like, how often and James mentions this
mhm,
all the time, and it might be tired to some people, but it is a good point, like, don't don't get tired of the fact that you're winning games because you never know when you can just lose a game that maybe you shouldn't, and by the way, we saw that again tonight, like,
mhm.
and this happens. This one, it feels like we should see coming at this point. A Pitt team that feels like it is rudderless, a Louisville team coming off a Notre Dame win, and of course Pitt wins right at home 38-21 in like pretty convincing fashion because that's how
And
this
Pitt's
goes.
quarterback, John.
Yes, Christian Veillere, and I am not even opening that can of worms. We are not having
Stevie.
that discussion.
Stevie.
Yeah, yeah,
I know.
Christian or CV, whatever you want to call
Stevie,
him.
whose name we've heard 20 variations of, a few
Yes.
of them from him and his family. We're
Yeah.
moving on, we're moving on.
Yeah.
That's Pitt's problem.
Yeah, that is not something we have to worry about anymore, fortunately. Looks like he played well, you know what I mean? Not the highest completion percentage, but threw 2 touchdowns. Looked like the offense was finally moving the ball for Pitt. This isn't a Pitt podcast though. But yeah, like but it is a good example of like what it takes week in and week out to be undefeated. You cannot slip up at all. Maybe you can make mistakes against UMass. Maybe you can make them against Delaware. You can't against West Virginia. West Virginia found that out, by the way, the
Mhm.
other night when they lost on a Hail Mary to Houston at the last second. Some of us were watching another sporting
Don't
event.
yeah, it was
But-
Thursday Night Football. Yeah, you're right, John. Thursday Night
yeah,
Football.
we
We're
all,
all locked
that's
into
right.
the Chiefs, yeah.
We were all watching Braves Phillies game 4. But no, I do think like again, like every team gets to find out like pretty
Mhm.
frequently. Wisconsin was a 9.5 point favorite today against Iowa and like just couldn't do anything offensively and lost and was one of the ugliest games of the year. Like you cannot take these wins for granted. So I'll never be
Big Ten
critical of
West,
them for
man.
yeah. Big Ten
Oh,
West, which
man.
also I know they're getting rid of divisions, but would have included Oregon and Washington if they didn't, which was just an absolute shootout going on at the same time as Iowa, Wisconsin, which was a really beautiful juxtaposition. But no, I think they're right for it, right? Like I think they handle that exactly how they should. There was one thing that James Franklin said in the postgame presser that he brought up again. I don't know if you saw this. Evidently, during a broadcast today, Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt
I heard
mentioned
about it. Yeah.
these comments that James made, and there was essentially a shot at James for making comments about scheduling, despite the fact that Penn State was playing UMass. Listen, if you want Penn State propaganda, this is not the podcast to listen to. Let me say this. James Franklin was not taking a shot at Michigan. He was not taking a shot at Ohio State. He was agreeing with that idea. He wants Penn State to schedule that way. I don't know how many times people have to say this. It's so like we're in a weird era where everyone tries to take everything as criticism to flip into.
Mhm.
It's like when Georgia is like nobody believed in us. It's like
Yeah,
guys, everyone
okay.
thought you were going undefeated. But no, it's like this era of using anything to fuel that fire. Uh, he was not being critical of Ohio State or Michigan. He brought it up again post game. He said, I think he called him
He
interesting
did. Yeah, like,
because
interesting comments, yeah.
yeah,
Still clearly
like
bothering him.
yes, which honestly it keeps coming up. Like people keep bringing it up. I don't blame him for being bothered in that scenario because
Yeah.
like at some
But
point, like
John, I don't
people
again,
need to read the context.
I have been here every single day since James Franklin stepped off the plane at the University Park Airport. This week for me was super weird in that
Yes,
he says the whole explosive play comment, and I'm just like, okay, whatever. James is like being trying to be funny, like
yeah,
whatever. I think nothing of it, right? Like I know what the
yeah.
reporter was trying to ask, totally get it.
We talked
The
about that
same
on the
thing.
preview episode too.
Yeah,
We
the
knew
s the
what he was
scheduling
trying to get at.
comment. I understood what he was saying. You can go ahead and Google and see the schedules, like, he's been consistent about this. Again, this did not rise to the level of me even writing about it or even
No,
thinking of writing about it, and so I just don't and again, you and I were here on the ground covering this team day in and day out, and it's frustrating for us when you see stuff like this happen because 'cause I'm like, "Guys, like, does anyone read anything or like pay attention to what we're reporting or saying?" And I know I'm preaching to the choir here because if you're
yes.
here listening to the Nittany Dispatch, you obviously care. You obviously are very up on Penn State. But yeah, I mean, it's just bizarre some of the stuff that's happening. And I guess maybe some of that has to
It's
do
just
with,
UMass week. I think people are
yeah,
trying
like,
to
was
find
it
something
UMass week on people were like bored as hell, or was it the fact that like Penn State is in this prominent position nationally that more people are like
under the
looking for
microscope now.
ways? Yeah, I don't know. It was a weird week for me in
Well,
that regard, and like I just didn't get any of it.
it's not like you heard anyone yelling something like, I don't know, "Attaboy Harper" in the locker room or anything like that. Like, it's not like anything like that
I got
happened
nothing.
here.
I got
Yeah,
nothing. I got
just had to throw that one in
I
there.
just
But no,
just
I
pain. Pain.
it has been a very strange week from that perspective, and I do think it's that's a good leaping off point into the talk about their standing, right where they're at nationally, and I
Mhm.
think that's just a sign that they're under the microscope constantly now, because again, we're not. I'm not just going to defend Penn State for no reason, right? Like we try and do the job, like cross our T's, dot our I's, like do it
Trust
how it
me,
should be
if
done.
there's someone who,
Yeah,
I'm sure people are
I've been
alarmed
on
hearing this right now, like Audrey's,
right.
defending Penn State like something must be wrong.
And
No,
we've
I mean,
both been on the wrong end of when James doesn't like a question that you've asked. We've all been there before.
yeah,
Neither of these comments that happened, we usually have a good sense, I like to think, of when, okay, he said something or someone said something or he did something that maybe will go viral a little. The push-ups a couple weeks ago at the
well, I'm his
whiteout when
fact
you
checker
mentioned
now,
the
so yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
like which is nice and very funny to me. But like that was a
it was
moment where you're like,
weird.
okay, the people pick up on this, like whatever,
Yeah.
it's gonna become a thing. The coffee thing, you could see it coming. I left the press conference Tuesday, went to a staff meeting, and like didn't think anything of it, right? Like I was like, yeah, this is like nothing happened. Like didn't think anything of what happened with the deep shot question, didn't think anything of the scheduling stuff. And like you see these tweets blow up, and it's like, I am begging people just to read the transcript or watch the video. Like there's nothing here.
I didn't even tweet about the explosive play thing because I'm like, "Oh, like,
Neither did I.
whatever, like, it's a storyline we've written it a million times."
Yep.
I just
Something we'll
yeah,
find out answers about next week, by the way.
I was gonna say, we're gonna find out a heck of a lot about QB1 this coming week, and we're also gonna find out about the explosive plays because, John, do you think Penn State can win in Columbus by kinda grinding clock, doing what they've been doing? Because here's the other thing, and I'll flip back to him. Uh, Nick Singleton got the start Saturday night or Saturday afternoon. Katron Allen to me looked like the more explosive back.
Yeah,
I
I think
Allen, not 9 carries, for 68 yards, Singleton 15 carries for 79 yards. If we're in the business of splitting hairs, whether we like it or not,
yep.
Singleton is yet to rush for 100 yards in a game this season. Not the stat I expected to be presenting here at the midpoint. Katron Allen does have 100 yards in a game this year, but I mean collectively it's fine, but we're not seeing the run game. I guess
Yeah.
like I expected to see it.
So a couple things. I think they can, and I
Mhm.
don't like. Usually not that you got to ground and pound, whatever. Like that's not my general philosophy with football. But I think they can because again, it goes back to them. I think they're better than Ohio State, and so I think they can impose their will. Sort of. I don't think that's as true against Michigan, right? I think they need
Mhm.
to stretch the field a little more. I do think it would help to do that against Ohio State. Like I don't think it's a bad thing to stretch the field. But to your point about Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, I just like I think Katron Allen's the best running back on this team right now. And it's not a knock on Nick Singleton. He didn't, to his credit, especially in the second half. Well, started to say second half, third quarter, end of the second quarter. Singleton didn't look as hesitant. But in recent weeks, he's looked kind of hesitant. And Katron Allen is a very decisive runner, right? Trey Potts is a very decisive runner. Like they see the hole, they hit it, they go. And we see Katron fighting for extra yards all the time and all that stuff. Right now, it feels like, and I don't want to speak for Nick Singleton or anything like that. I didn't speak to him post game. I don't think he was made available. But he it looks like he's looking for the big play, right? Like he's looking for the crease to hit it and go and make the big play happen. Maybe there's some pressure there. I don't know.
Pressing
But
a
I
little
do
bit,
think,
yeah.
yeah, I do think like Katron Allen right now should just be their starting running back. And I'm gonna write about this in Good Bad Ugly. You'll be able to see that at SundayDaily.com. But like I think he should be getting like 65% of the carries right now. He is the better back. He's less of a tell when he's out there because he's also, for my money, their best pass blocker and their best receiver as a running back. So you're not kind of telling on yourself what you're
Mhm.
doing when he's out there, or you're at least not taking a step back in like either the run game or passing game when he's out there. And I think, against Ohio State, you need to guarantee yourself when 4 yards are available, you got to get them, right? Like you can't take a 2 yard loss on an easy 4 yard gain. As much as you want to create big plays and everything like that, it is important to get the ball down the field and move the ball down the field and not let a possession go, right? Because if, let's say there's 4 yards available on first down and you can take that, but you end up getting a 2 yard loss because you're looking for the big play. 2nd and 12 is a bad place to be against this
Yeah.
Ohio State defense, right? Like 2nd and 6, workable. You can do something with it. Maybe you hit a big play, whatever. But you cannot let yourself get behind the sticks. And right now, I have more faith that Katron Allen is going to consistently gain yards on offense than I do with Nick Singleton. They're both really talented. That could flip, but right now, to me, Allen's better.
Yeah, Allen's long run this week, 18 yards. Singleton's longest was 10. The run that stood out to me was Allen's 9-yard touchdown run. Actually, Nick Dawkins was in at right guard there because again they were
Saw a
working
lot
some
of that
different
early
formations.
too.
Yeah, we did see a good bit of Dawkins at right guard today. Saw Drew Shelton at right tackle, at left tackle, and again, this is like the perfect game to start flipping the page toward the future a little bit too. But to me, on that 9-yard touchdown run, Allen was patient, and again, it was a mismatch up front, but the line gave him a ton of room, kept his legs churning, gets in for the touchdown, and to me, that was one of Penn State's, I think, better runs this season.
Yep.
It's been interesting. Now, I feel like, John, we could say all of this, and the thing that I will not rule out is you could still see Nick Singleton bust off like a 70-yard run in the horseshoe. Like
That's the thing.
he's so explosive at some point. I just it has to happen, and I'm flabbergasted that it hasn't this point in various reasons, depending how defenses have played them. We talked to Jaywan Sider late this past week. That's something that Jaywan hit on. He's really thrilled with all of these backs and kind of their development. They've been catching passes, but to me, that's the element. I was like, and I was talking to someone when I was leaving the press box today, and I'm like, you know what? You can't rule it out with Singleton because we've seen it before and we're gonna see it again at some point. I just don't know, none of us just know when that's gonna hit.
Yeah, to me right now, Singleton, for NFL fans, and obviously, honestly, Penn State fans will remember
Mhm.
Kenneth Walker III for
Mhm.
his time at Michigan
Michigan
State.
State?
Right now, at with the Seahawks, he is ultimate boomer bust. Right, he's either picking up a yard or he's breaking a 40-yard gain. Right, like that's kind of what it feels like with Singleton,
It
and
puts you in
that
fantasy football hell, yeah.
yeah, right. Like it has its benefits when you need that kind of big play. He can be the guy that can flip a game. But when you were kind of in a close game, I think you'd probably rather have the guy that you can trust to get the 4. Because 4 yards a carry is almost always a win. You can look at success rate and stuff like that. Like 4 yards on first down is usually a good spot, right?
Mhm.
Like you want to ideally you get 5 yards on first down, but I think you know what I mean. If you can put yourself in
Yeah.
position to not be behind the sticks, you're in a good place. Katron Allen just gives you that right now, and I think the trust has to be placed there. I'm not saying anything that like Nick Singleton's bad or anything like that. To be clear,
Yeah.
he's
But
very,
John, we
very
we gotta
good.
be cautious in this day and age because you could end up as a
I know.
viral
I don't.
sensation.
I
Somebody's
don't.
gonna
I don't
take
want
a
to.
clip out of this and yeah.
I don't want to be the next clip that's circulating on
Yeah.
Twitter. That is a bad place to be. I never want to. The job is not to be the story, and I would like to remain not being the
Mhm.
story. But no, I think like this is a good sign that the running game might be trending in the right direction. Just maybe a different way than we. Because honestly, if you'd asked me preseason, I would have said Singleton was the better runner, and that probably. I don't know that I would say it wasn't close, but I thought it was apparent at the very least.
And we kept hearing all off season. It was, hey, Nick Singleton's getting a lot of love, a lot of attention. Don't forget about Katron Allen. Don't forget about, and it to me, it felt very
Makes sense
forced at
now.
some points. But now I'm like, oh yeah, I definitely see it. Again, it's a good problem to have if you're Penn State. You got a lot of playmakers, and Bo Prabula got the entire fourth quarter, which brings me back, John, in our pregame predictions. You
We don't
had a
have to do this.
very bold take, and I tweeted at you during the game because I'm at the other end of the press box, so I can't, come down
Some
and
of us have
taunt
seats at the
you.
50-yard line. That's
Yeah,
just
some
me.
of us are like probably buried behind a pole or something. No, I'm in
That's right.
seat 69. It's a very nice seat. Um,
Nice.
but you had said that you thought Bo Prabula was going to enter this game very early. Fourth quarter was his.
So
Again, the game was
the
out of hand. We're
well, also
splitting hairs
the third quarter would have happened had Daequan Hardy not returned that second punt for a touchdown. Like
again.
Prabula was going to
Mhm.
come in there. I honestly thought like he should have been in the first drive after the half. I think you can make the argument that he should have been in that last drive before halftime. Like he is, I don't know. I think the goal today should have been get out healthy. That's it.
Yep.
Like get out healthy, get to Ohio State.
And
You
I
up
think
28
it looked like
nothing.
they accomplished that from
Yeah,
what we
for sure.
saw. Looked like
But
it.
like to mitigate risk, once you're up 28 nothing, all of them. Pull every single starter. You don't need
Get
to
him
play
out. Get
anymore.
him out.
It is no longer your turn. Yeah, I honestly thought there was credence to it. And if we're being realistic, like there was a chance that that had actually happened had they not stalled out those first two drives.
Right.
Had they scored, like because they were moving the ball decently. I said it was a
Oh,
brutal
a
start
great
on
starting
offense.
field position too. I mean,
Yeah,
that was the other part. Yeah.
I said it was a brutal start on offense. To be clear, a punt and a fumble against the worst defense in the country is a brutal start on
Yeah.
offense. Just didn't expect it to continue, and it didn't, so it wasn't a surprise. But yeah, I think like the if they score on those two drives, and suddenly it's 14 nothing that early, I think we probably see Prbula in the second
Mhm.
quarter. They definitely also got off to a slower start than I anticipated with the punt and the fumble. But yeah, I would have had Drew Allar out of there so quickly. I'd have had Keandre Lambert Smith out of there so quickly. Each and every one of those dudes. Like I would have had Olu would have played a snap. It would have been like,
You know
you're
what? I'm
good.
gonna have to look at
Uh,
because I have to go back and look at the snap counts for Olu and see what that final number is because I know we were having a little over under on 30 the other day, and I think
yeah.
I mean because Penn State I
I
think they
think he
ran
I
what
think he
60,
went
62 plays.
I think he went over it, like, which is surprising. Like, I don't know. I really thought like there was no reason to have him in. I get it. Like, you don't want a guy to be sitting on ice essentially for 2 weeks in a row heading into a massive game, but like that dude's good. Like the
Yeah.
last guy on the team you
Well,
got to worry about
and
is
here's
Olu
the
Fashanu.
thing, and I thought about this because I have a column up at The Athletic. Essentially, not many people wanted to talk about Ohio State, but that didn't stop me from asking people. When has that ever
That's
stopped
right.
me before?
Oh, I know.
But
We all know.
we all have been there. I was doing some probing post game with my questions, and Olu Fashion, remember last year, the end of the game, he was on the sideline riding the bike when things fizzled in the fourth quarter. And I talked to Olu and his family this past winter, and they actually had met with James Franklin around that same time about Olu's future. And after that game, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm coming back." Like, obviously, there were many reasons at play,
Yeah.
but he thought that this could be a special team and that he wanted to be part of it. And so again, like as I was writing my column after the game, I'm thinking of that and I'm like, "Oh yeah, like remember he was on the sideline when everything fell
Yeah.
apart." Man, John, there are going to be so many. There were only 2 scouts listed today in the press box, a scout from the Packers and a scout from the Falcons. Anytime there's a Packers scout there, my fan antenna goes up.
That's right.
Packers have been there quite a bit this year. One day they were watching Chop Robinson at practice very intently. Again,
Mhm.
I'm watching them watch him, so it's we'll see. But man, there's so many NFL matchups next week on in that game. The scout list is gonna be crazy. Like, that's gonna
It's
be a
gonna be a pretty
marquee
packed
matchup.
press box in general, right? Like it's gonna
Yeah.
be
Oh, yeah.
scouts, it's gonna be media members. It is going to be
Yahoos like us, media members, yeah.
yeah. It's gonna be like honestly, like this is gonna be a really fun week. It's gonna be exhausting. Again, typical
Yeah.
sports writer complaint. I know, and none of you
Terribly
want to hear that.
exhausting week, but it's
And
gonna be great.
and you're all right for criticizing me for complaining. But like it's gonna be a lot of fun. Like this is one of the two most exciting
Mhm.
matchups of the year for Penn State. And if they win this one, oh man, like the playoff rankings come out soon. I think in 2 weeks, right? 2.5 weeks,
Yes,
whatever
it's
it is.
usually around Halloween, so yeah, gosh, yeah, we're in
Yeah.
October, so yeah.
And so like I don't know, like I don't know. I was gonna say that I think they have a chance to be the number one team in the country if
Ooh,
they beat Ohio State.
ooh, John,
Listen, it's it is very possible though,
yeah.
right? Like if they get that win, they're
And
Ohio
I
State's only
think too,
loss.
like you look at this season in college football, and it's been crazy. And Penn State, again, as boring as it's been at a couple points, I'm thinking of you, Delaware. I'm thinking of you, UMass. They've stayed the course. They've checked every single box to date, and I think that's the thing that you can't lose sight of, right? I had a couple people tweeting at me during the game. They're like, "Man, this is great. It's a stress-free Saturday," and I was like, "Yeah, you're right. But next week, man, you're gonna be
Yeah.
losing it." But to me, that's the exciting thing, right? Everybody, when
Well,
the schedule was made, you looked at this game, you looked at the Michigan game, and you said, that's the season, right? That's why James Franklin's making ten million a year, right? Roughly, like for games like this. That's why everybody cares so much about that 365-day-a-year arms race. It's to see what happens on the field. That's why it's been 5 years, since the great to elite comment. This is your measuring stick, and the week is here. Like, lean into it, embrace it, enjoy it. It's going to be a super fun week. But
Well,
yeah,
and
you're
to
right,
be
John. It's going to
clear,
be exhausting.
yeah, again,
I
nobody
mean,
cares,
yeah,
which is totally understandable.
we're
But
going to
like,
be
no,
taking energy drink recommendations, all
yes,
that stuff. Yeah.
always. But no, like three undefeated teams that were in the top 15 went down today. Like that happens far too often to take these things for granted. If you're a Penn State fan, Oregon losing to Washington, USC getting smoked by Notre Dame, and
Yeah.
Louisville losing to Pitt, like you're down to very few undefeated teams left in the Power Five. And so, like, I think, like I said, I'm not saying it's going to happen. There's a world where Penn State's like a top 3 team in the first playoff rankings. I don't think that's, outside the realm of possibility at all. And there's a world where like Michigan, Penn State is like number 2 against number 3, which would be a lot of fun. But I'm not going to get that far ahead of things. It is, we're already advancing past Ohio State, seemingly the most exciting game of the year, I think, to this point, and one that carries a lot of weight for a lot of reasons. I'll be writing about that this week. I know you'll be writing about the matchup as well. It is an exciting time, I think, if you're a Penn State fan. And we will have you covered on every front. We'll be back midweek, early in the week this week. We'll be talking to Bill Landis, as Audrey said. We'll be
Dollar B for sure.
That's right. Again, just notable Phillies fan. Very important note here as we close things down.
I hear they
We'll
play this week, John.
They
heard
do.
that's the thing, yeah.
I heard that they are the only NL East team playing this week.
Man, I've taken a lot of flack this week, deservedly so. I will say, John, congratulations to your Phillies. They were by far the better team. The Braves have broken my heart yet again, but as if you can see behind me, there we go. I'll still get my 2021 World Series sign up there next to my Ronald Acuna Jr. bobblehead. So,
which I also own because we went to that game together.
That's right. Yeah. So you have one of those too. Yeah.
And I will be I hope everyone enjoys my attire for so tune into the video podcast if you would like to see what I have on.
Hopefully I don't spill a beer on myself again, because I hope nobody caught that today. So
for the early the midweek episode this week. But we will also have you covered from Columbus. Audrey and I will be recording after the game. We'll have every bit of this broken down. I imagine we may set our personal record for length of podcast because there's going to be so much to talk about. Very exciting times, though. Like I mentioned earlier, if you like what you see, if you're enjoying listening to the podcast, rate, review, subscribe, all of that good stuff on Apple, on YouTube, wherever you find us.
5 stars.
Yeah, that's right. 5 stars, because this is a 5-star duo right here, in our opinion, at least. But once again, thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.